left off when you left the building in March, and that's in making our comic. Now, we're not going to be doing a full comic like we normally would be doing. We're going to be doing what's called a triptych, and the triptych just means it's like a 3-paneled art piece. So our comic is just going to be 3 panels, but within that, I'd like you to show all the things that you have learned through this. So figurative proportions that are correct, like 8 heads high, starting off with a gesture drawing and then defining the edges to make it look like whoever you want it to be or whatever character you've created. Some hands and feet, attempt that, and in one place a little bit of foreshortening. Now, in telling a graphic story, which graphic just means picture, and telling a story in pictures, we're really going to need to, especially if it's only 3 panels, we're really going to need to have a very, very short thing we're telling. In the example that I do, I think it's just going to be like a day in the life of, lockdown. So it's just going to be really, really simple, really, really concise. And we'll briefly in this video look a little bit at the history of comic books and how it's become a legitimized art form and how pop art and the pop art movement did that and helped to do that. And we will look at how to tell a story kind of sequentially in that way. But I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible since this will be your last 5th grade project. There'll be one more fun sort of all grade thing that will be posted in a few days, but this is your last official one. need for this is a piece of paper, a ruler, pencil, eraser, some markers or a coloring supply. If you have some different widths of permanent markers, you could use those too. But if you don't have any markers or Sharpies or anything like that, you can color this however you want. We might want to start off with a very, very quick storyboard, meaning we're going to just very, very loosely figure out what it is that we'll be drawing. So I'm making, like, think of it as a thumbnail sketch, only there'll be 3 of them. Now I make my panels, and this is just in our thumbnail sketch, very, very loosely because I might want to adjust the size of those depending on what action is going on in each. And we want to be careful to avoid just sort of this, here's one thing the person's doing, here's the next thing, and here's the next thing, because it's not very visually interesting. What you want to think about when you're creating a comic is not just the composition in one of these boxes, but in all 3. And this is just where I'm kind of trying to figure out, well, what do I want to happen? Well, maybe if I'm telling the story of one of my days in lockdown, I think it would start off with maybe meeting with students on Meet. So I could show any kind of, like, I could have the laptop this way. I could say, no, you know what, like, maybe that's not the best way of showing that, because I might want to show the screen too. So maybe I did all of my meeting with you sitting on the floor in my son's room. So I'll start off with my gesture drawing. Kind of sitting on a little table. So maybe I'll do something like this. So this is really rough on this first one. I don't have to do any of the details. And then I might think, well, you know what, this might be more interesting if I crop it and make this a little bit bigger. Then I can have, you know, a title. So I've kind of just really roughly figured out what I want to happen there. Now maybe in my next box after Meet, I would be doing a lot of filming. And on this one, I want to maybe work on having a different size of things. So if I put my tripod up and drew, like, really roughly, that's a place where I could work on some feet. Now I wouldn't want to crunch the person in at the bottom of the box. You want to be careful not to do that. Like, oh, that's my box and my person is not going to be in proportion so I'm just going to squeeze those feet in. Don't do that. Either cut it off at the bottom, or this is why we're starting with thumbnails, especially if it's figurative, this long stretched out box references a figurative work. So maybe my next section is doing some filming. And you know what? Since my son was helping, and grabbing at me. So maybe that's my next panel. If I want to add text, I can. I don't have to, though. And an important note about text is that it shouldn't just be a story that you're illustrating. Your story should be able to be told just by looking at the pictures, and the text should be contributing to that narrative, to that story. So you're really, like, if you took the text out, you could still kind of tell what was happening, and you could work on dialogue boxes, and we can figure out that later. But right now we're just kind of working out the compositions. And then I'm going to try to attempt some foreshortening my third box, so you can do it in whatever box that you want to. So I thought to wrap this up and show some foreshortening, what better way than to really capture this time period is, I know my main complaint is having to edit myself and watch myself and listen to myself so constantly. Like, it's not a natural thing to be staring at your face when you're communicating with others. So, you know, this sort of turning off a thing in the computer, and you get like some foreshortening there. So I'm actually going to be drawing right from the picture in Photo Booth, so I can really get that crazy foreshortening. And I'm going to believe it, that my finger is there. And I do want you to do this, like have models, if somebody will pose for you to get the basic shapes down of things, or if you just need to have a picture that you're working from. So that's what I'm working from here. There's the hand, and if I make this a little bit like that. So then I have a basis of what my panels are going to look like. Now at this point we can start our final, and we have a better sense of what we're going to be doing with it. Now you'll notice in earlier comic books that it is a little bit more boxy and kind of gridded off, but as it has evolved as an art form, you see the boxes that are starting to kind of literally, the drawings come outside of the box, and you have all different ways of breaking up that space. But a reminder that either way, there's the individual composition in the tiny box, and then there's the composition of the whole page. So now with our final, this is when we can use our ruler. Oops, it's not parallel. Okay. Maybe the center one I won't really even put inside a box. This one in the end. So I'm going to have somebody pose for me. I don't have anyone to pose for me here, but I'm going to be looking at an image of, it could be anybody sitting cross-legged. And in our gesture drawing, spine line, hip line, shoulder line, kind of sitting cross-legged. I'm starting off lightly and very, very sketchy, and it's not really supposed to look like anyone yet, because if, you know, a family member is modeling for me, or a sibling, I'm not really making a portrait of them at the moment. Okay. In fact, if I wanted to sort of show what my view is on that screen, kind of make it sort of screen-like, you can play around with the way that you're telling the story and breaking up this space. Note that I don't try to force the feet in there if they're not going to fit, because this was how big my head was. A little bit of that musculature of the deltoid there that we learned, and some foreshortening. And now I can go in and start to refine my edges. One thing we didn't go over was profiles. And that's where it's going to be really helpful to have somebody take a picture of who you're drawing. By the way, this doesn't have to be about you. Obviously, you can make up characters. This could be much more fantastical than just like a typical day in your life. If we were in school, we would go through a long process of developing characters that would be in conjunction with things you're learning in ELA. If you make lines darker in front of things, it'll look like that they are overlapped in front. And if your proportions sort of feel wrong, they might just be, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. The thing about drawing that is different than other subjects is that when something is wrong, you have a gut instinct that it is. And it's learning to listen to those instincts. See, my foot would be about there. So this middle part of the triptych isn't even in a box. I mean, I could make one if I wanted to, or I could just have this break in front. And again, with your foreshortening, it's going to be really helpful if you make the lines in the front darker than the lines in the back. And any text that you want to add should also be part of your composition. You can do your title however you'd like. We'd actually spend a week working on title pages and what they look like. But this is a shorthand version of the project. Next is adding color. If you have black markers, I like to start with that, with just like outlining, which normally we're not going to be big about outlining when we're trying to make things look realistic, but when we're trying to make something more of a graphic novel, it's going to be a little bit different. It's helpful if you have different marker widths, but it's okay if you don't. Okay, with color, use what you'd like. If you have markers, you can. If you want to just keep it black and white, and I don't mean just outlined, but in breaking up the spaces to have this compositional patch of black, white, and gradient kind of shifts, you can do that too if you'd like. You could do it in the pop art style of the original printings that just had primary colors. So it's really, really up to you. So if you want, you can take an eraser. Sometimes I don't like erasing my under sketches just because I like the buildup of line, but you can do this if you'd like to. Okay. There's lots of ways that you can pursue the coloring aspects of this. If you want to show that things are in shadow, you can do cross-hatching. Especially if you're using markers, you wouldn't do the mixing complementary colors to create shadows. And I keep saying graphic, which means that it's just very black and white and visual. So you can do shadows that way. You can outline things. So instead of like coloring in, say for instance skin, you could do this. Sometimes just outlining is all you need to do. You could, we used to a long time ago do this all in pointillism, which is how the pop artists like Roy Lichtenstein were copying the way that printers printed comics. So as these little dots, and you could even do a buildup of dots, because if you have more dots concentrated in one area, it'll look like it's darker. You can do that. You can just straight up color. This is going to be totally up to you. I might just keep a color scheme of my primary colors. If you have colored pencils or crayons or a different kind of coloring supply, you're welcome to use that as well. And again, if you didn't want to color it at all, you wouldn't have to. And I leave the areas that I want to have a highlight on them blank and build up more mark where I want there to be shadow. But there isn't really a right or wrong way to do this. Maybe you just want to have a little bit of color. So I chose to just do the primary color scheme. You can do whatever you want. There's not going to be a right or wrong way to how you color this, or even don't color it. But if you do just do an outline, I would have some areas that are not just outlined, but are blocked off. Because what you're really thinking of is each one of these panels of this triptych is a composition, but then all together it's a composition too. So if you step back and squint a little bit and you're like, oh, you know what, I think I might need a little bit of yellow here, or I need a little bit of this color here, kind of looking at it as a whole will help. Maybe where you need to have some lines emphasized, just those last finishing touches. Cross hatching, where you go both ways, just to get some variety to your marks.